The galaxy had a rule about Deathworlds. You catalogued them, you flagged them, you drew a wide circle around them on every star map, and you did not, under any circumstances, make contact with whatever had managed to survive on one. Vex'ali had agreed with this policy his entire career. That was before he spent a Tuesday watching Marcus Reeves eat lunch. Bay 7 on Helix Station was not a place Vex'ali would have chosen to spend his morning. It was cold, loud, and smelled of machine oil and something the human canteen database identified as burnt coffee. The lighting was harsh. The ceiling was too low. 3 separate pieces of heavy equipment were operating simultaneously, and nobody seemed bothered by this. Vex'ali pressed himself against the upper observation gantry railing and watched the human below, and he took very careful notes, because that was his job, and because if he stopped taking notes, he would have to sit alone with what he was feeling, and he was not ready for that. Marcus Reeves was 34 years old. Grade 3 cargo loader. Average performance reviews. Nothing in his file suggested he was anything other than completely, ordinarily, unremarkably human. Vex'ali was beginning to understand that this was the problem. It had started at 600 hours that morning, 7 minutes before the shift was scheduled to begin. Marcus had walked into the bay carrying a small metal container of liquid. Vex'ali's scanner identified it immediately. Coffee, brewed, black, approximately 78 degrees Celsius. He watched Marcus drink half of it in one long pull. Sarin tissue began to sustain thermal damage at 41 degrees. Vex'ali knew this not as a fact from a textbook, but as lived experience, as the particular sharp sensation of holding a warm cup slightly too long, 78 degrees, in one pull, without flinching. He told himself there was surely an explanation, some human biological adaptation he hadn't read about yet. He made a note to check. He checked. The explanation was that humans simply did not find this remarkable. The bay doors had been open since before Marcus arrived, and the temperature in Bay 7 was sitting at 4 degrees Celsius. Vex'ali was wearing a full thermal underlayer beneath his diplomatic uniform, and he was still aware of the cold in a way that was distracting and faintly miserable. Marcus was wearing a thin fabric shirt. He was humming. Vex'ali didn't recognize the song. It didn't matter. What mattered was the easy looseness in the human's shoulders, the complete absence of any signal that the temperature registered as an inconvenience, let alone a threat. He moved through the cold bay the way Vex'ali moved through climate-controlled embassy corridors, without thinking about it, without needing to. He pulled up the Earth file on his datapad and scrolled to environmental data. Surface temperature range, minus 89 degrees Celsius to 57 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure variance, extreme. Weather events, frequent and severe. Recommended environmental protection for non-adapted species, full suit, mandatory. Recommended, mandatory. Marcus picked up a cargo container that the manifest listed at 180 kilograms and carried it across the bay. He set it down. He picked up another one. Vex'ali looked at the Earth gravity entry, 9.8 meters per second squared. Classification, extreme. Habitation without adaptation. Not recommended above 0.4 G with continuous medical supervision. Marcus had been living at 1 G since the day he was born. His bones had grown under it. His muscles had built themselves against it every single day of his life without him ever once deciding to. His body had simply done what bodies do on Earth. It had adapted to the world trying to crush it. And it had done this so completely and so quietly that Marcus Reeves did not know it had happened. He was humming again. Vex'ali gripped the railing. At 08:34 hours, Marcus sat down for his meal break on an upturned crate near the bay wall, and Vex'ali watched from above with the focused attention of someone who had stopped pretending this was routine observation. The food came from a personal container. Protein. Carbohydrates. A dark red sauce that Vex'ali's scanner flagged before he even asked it to. Capsaicin. The chemical name appeared in his datapad with a small warning indicator beside it, the kind the system generated automatically for compounds it considered relevant to note. Capsaicin, produced by earth plants as a deterrent against predators and foraging animals. Activates pain receptors on contact. Classified irritant. Recommended exposure for most galactic species. Avoid. Marcus added more sauce from a small bottle he kept in his jacket pocket. He ate slowly, reading something on a handheld screen, occasionally glancing up at the bay with the relaxed expression of a man spending a pleasant few minutes with his thoughts. He finished the meal. He drank the rest of his coffee. He looked, Vexali thought, like someone who had just done something enjoyable. The incident happened at 0941 hours. Vexali almost missed it. He had been updating his notes and glanced up at the sound of metal on metal, a sharp, brief sound, and saw Marcus standing still at the upper rack assembly, looking at his left hand. The bracket edge had caught him across the knuckles. Even from 14 meters, Vexali could see it was not a minor graze. He watched Marcus look at the wound with an expression that was not pain, exactly. More like mild inconvenience. The expression of a man who has spilled something on his shirt. He walked to the supply cabinet. He took out a roll of adhesive bandage. He wrapped it around his hand, pressed it flat, flexed his fingers once to test it, and walked back to the crates. 47 seconds. He picked up the next container. Vexali stood very still at the railing for a long moment. Around him the bay continued. The equipment noise, the cold air moving, the distant sound of other workers somewhere deeper in the station. Normal sounds, ordinary morning sounds on an ordinary station, on an ordinary trade route, at the edge of a civilization that had been cataloguing species and drawing careful circles around Deathworlds for 600 years. He thought about the wound. Not about the injury itself. About the 47 seconds. About the flex of the fingers. About the way Marcus had walked back to the crates with the particular settled focus of someone returning to a task they intended to finish. He thought about the word ordinary. He had used it several times in his preliminary notes that morning. Ordinary human, standard worker, nothing exceptional. He was beginning to understand that he had been using it wrong. Marcus worked until 11:24 hours. By the end of his shift, he had moved what Vexali's count estimated at nearly 5,000 kilograms of cargo. He had consumed 3 containers of the thermal beverage. The bay temperature had dropped to 1 degree for 40 minutes when a corridor seal was opened, and Marcus had not reacted to this in any way. He had spoken briefly with a colleague who came through near the end, said something that made her laugh, a real laugh, unguarded, and then finished the last of his work with the same unhurried rhythm he had carried since 0600 hours. He picked up his jacket. He picked up the empty coffee container. He walked out. He did not look up at the observation gantry. He had no reason to. The report reached the High Council of the Seren Collective at 0340 station time, routed through 3 levels of diplomatic encryption, and flagged Priority 1 by the Automated Significance Assessment System. A system that had not issued a Priority 1 flag in 11 years. Councillor Drisson was the first to read it. She read it twice. Then she called Councillor Fave, who read it once and immediately called an emergency session. By 0600, 7 of the 9 council seats were filled, and the remaining 2 were patched in remotely from their home systems, their bioluminescence flickering through the communication screens in the pale colours of interrupted sleep and growing unease. Vexali's report sat at the centre of the chamber's holographic display, rotating slowly, its pages catching the light. He watched a cargo worker for one morning, said Councillor Rethia, his light patterns cycling through the slow amber of skepticism. And from this he extrapolates an alliance recommendation? He watched a cargo worker for one morning, Drizzen said carefully, and came to the same conclusion our threat assessment models have been quietly building toward for 3 decades. He simply had the clarity to say it plainly. The threat assessment models recommend continued observation. The threat assessment models have been recommending continued observation since before Vexali entered diplomatic service. Drizzen let that sit for a moment. At what point does continued observation become something we give a more honest name? Silence in the chamber. The kind of silence that had weight to it. The weight of 600 years of policy, of careful distance, of circles drawn on star maps by people who had told themselves they were being wise. It was Councillor Fave who finally spoke. There is another matter, he said. His light had gone very still, the flat white of controlled urgency, which among the Seren was more alarming than any shade of red. One that was not in Vexali's report, because he does not yet have clearance for it. He touched the display. Vexali's report slid aside, replaced by a tactical overlay. Star systems, shipping lanes, the familiar geometry of known space. And at the edge of it, highlighted in a colour, the chamber's display system reserved for a very specific category of event, a cluster of signals that had no business being where they were. This arrived 4 hours ago, Fev said, from our long-range sensor array, grid reference 7 Theta, approximately 6 light weeks from Sol. The chamber looked at the display. The Kretha, someone said quietly. A scouting formation, Fave confirmed. 14 ships moving slowly, not yet in violation of any treaty boundary. He paused, but moving in a direction that will become a violation in approximately 19 days if they maintain current heading and speed. Toward Earth, Drizzen said. Toward Earth. Another silence. A different kind this time. The Kretha were not technically at war with the Collective. They were also not technically at peace with anyone. They existed in the uncomfortable middle space that the galaxy's diplomats spent enormous energy managing, a species of cold, methodical intelligence who communicated in the language of pressure and advantage, who tested boundaries not with aggression, but with the slow, patient accumulation of positions that one day you looked up and realized had surrounded you. They had been watching Earth for years. The Collective knew this. Everyone knew this, and no one had said it plainly, because saying it plainly meant deciding what to do about it. If the Kretha make contact with humanity before we do, Drizzen said slowly, they will not be sending this. She gestured at Vexali's report. They will be sending an assessment of what humanity can do for them, and they will make humanity an offer calibrated to be very difficult to refuse. And we will have lost the initiative, said Rethia, the amber of his skepticism shifting reluctantly towards something more complicated. We will have lost more than the initiative. Drizzen looked around the chamber. We will have handed the most physically capable species this galaxy has produced in 600 years to the one civilization least likely to treat that capability with anything resembling restraint. The chamber was quiet again. Authorize Vexali, Five said finally. Full first contact protocol. Tell him what's coming. He's going to want to move quickly, someone said. Yes, Drizzen said. He is. Vexali received the authorization at 07114 the following morning, along with a classified tactical brief that he read standing in his quarters on Helix Station, with the particular focused stillness of someone recalibrating everything they thought they were doing here. He had sent a report recommending an alliance. The Council had responded by telling him there were 14 Kretha ships 6 light weeks from Sol, and 19 days to make first contact before the situation became something else entirely. He read the brief 3 times. Then he put his datapad down and stood at his porthole for a long moment, looking out at the station's docking ring. Bay 7 was visible from here, if you knew where to look. He thought about Marcus, about the 47 seconds. About do not send diplomats, send allies. He thought about the fact that the human had no idea any of this existed. That right now, in all probability, Marcus Reeves was starting his shift, carrying his coffee, moving through his morning with the same unhurried steadiness that had undone 6 centuries of Seren caution in the space of one observation report. Vexali picked up his datapad and sent a single message to the station's personnel directory. Marcus Reeves, Bay 7. I would like to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience. My name is Vexali. I am a diplomat. I believe we have things to discuss. He hesitated over the send button for only a moment. Then he thought 19 days. He pressed send. Marcus's response arrived 40 minutes later, which Vexali would later learn was fast for Marcus, who tended to check his messages during breaks and not before. It read, "Sure, I get off at noon. There's a canteen on level 4 that's pretty decent if you don't mind the noise. Meet you there at 12:30? Vexali read it twice. He had been prepared for suspicion, for caution, for the careful, probing response of someone who had been contacted out of nowhere by a foreign diplomat and wanted to understand the angle before committing to anything. Sure was not what he had expected. He sent back, 12:30, level 4 canteen. I will be there. He spent the intervening hours reviewing everything the collective's database had on human communication customs, social conventions, and the particular art of explaining to someone that their species had been under observation for 30 years and was now the subject of an interstellar geopolitical situation involving a scouting fleet and a 19-day window. The database did not have a specific entry for this situation. He was going to have to improvise. The canteen on level 4 was louder than Bay 7. Vexali registered this immediately and adjusted his auditory dampeners by 12%. The result was tolerable, though still well outside what Seren architecture would have classified as a reasonable dining environment. Humans, he was learning, did not appear to equate noise with distress in the same way most species did. If anything, they seemed to lean into it. Marcus Reeves was already seated when Vexali arrived at 12:26 hours. He had a tray in front of him, something steaming, something fried, and another container of coffee. The bandage on his left hand was still in place. He raised the uninjured one in a small wave when he spotted Vexali approaching. "You must be Vexali," Marcus said. "You're taller than I pictured." "I am within average Seren height parameters," Vexali replied automatically, then paused. "You are also within average human height parameters." Marcus grinned. "Good to know we're both statistically boring." Vexali sat across from him. Up close, the human was even more physically dense than the reports suggested. Bone structure built for gravity. Musculature layered without ostentation but with unmistakable strength. Minor scarring along the forearm, the kind acquired through repeated small injuries over time rather than a single dramatic event. "You said we had things to discuss," Marcus said, cutting into his food. "I should probably warn you, I'm not big on politics." "This is not politics," Vexali said. Marcus chewed, swallowed, took a sip of coffee that was almost certainly still above 70 degrees. "That sounds exactly like something that turns out to be politics." Vexali considered several prepared openings and discarded all of them. "Your species has been under observation by the Seren Collective for 31 standard years," he said instead. Marcus blinked once. "Okay," he said after a moment. "That's new. We have not made contact because Earth meets the criteria for a Deathworld classification." Marcus lowered his fork slightly. "Deathworld. Yes. That's not a great nickname. It is not intended as a compliment." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Vexali with an expression that was not fear. Not yet. It was assessment. The same look he had worn when examining the cut on his hand in Bay 7. "All right," Marcus said. "Run that by me again. We're what exactly?" "Your planet's environmental volatility, gravity well, atmospheric chemistry and biosphere toxicity place it in the top 2% of known habitable worlds for inherent lethality to baseline galactic life." Marcus let out a low whistle. "And we just live there." "Yes!" He took another bite of his food. "Okay, that's kind of metal." Vexali stared at him. Marcus shrugged. "Sorry, reflex. When something sounds extreme, we tend to categorize it as impressive instead of terrifying. Helps with morale." Vexali made a note of that. "There is more," he said. "I figured." Vexali brought up the tactical overlay on his datapad and rotated it so Marcus could see. The cluster of 14 Cretha ships pulsed in quiet red at the edge of the display. "These vessels are 6 light weeks from your system," he said. "They are not ours." Marcus leaned forward. "And they're coming here." "Yes. Why?" "Because your species is physically formidable. Because your industrial output has increased by 12% annually for the past 8 years. Because you have achieved orbital infrastructure in under a century from your first powered flight." Vexali paused. "Because you endure." Marcus looked at the display for a long moment. "They don't look that big," he said finally. "They are scouting ships." "Right." Another silence, but this one was different. Heavier, processing. "So what's your angle?" Marcus asked. "My angle," Vexali said carefully, "is that if they reach you first, the terms of your introduction to the wider galaxy will not be equitable." Marcus snorted softly. "Equitable. That's optimistic. We would prefer to make first contact ourselves." "And do what?" "Offer alliance." Marcus looked up at him sharply. "Alliance," he repeated. "Yes." "Based on one cargo worker eating lunch?" Vexali did not look away. "Based on a species that drinks a plant's chemical deterrent for recreation. That considers pain a signal rather than a directive. that evolved under gravity levels most civilizations avoid and calls it home. Marcus stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then he laughed. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't dismissive. It was the startled, incredulous laugh of someone who had just realized the conversation was far larger than they expected. You watched me drink hot coffee and decided we were interstellar mercenaries. I watched you injure your hand and return to work in 47 seconds. Marcus's laughter faded. Yeah, he said quietly. We do that. I know. The noise of the canteen swelled around them. Trays clattering, the voices overlapping, someone shouting from across the room. Marcus looked back at the red cluster of ships. And you've got 19 days, he said. Vexali's eyes flicked up. You were not informed of that number. You hesitated before you sent the message, Marcus said. People hesitate when there's a clock. Vexali felt, not for the first time, that he was the one being observed. 19 days, he confirmed. Marcus exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. Okay, Vexali echoed. Marcus looked at him directly. If we're doing this, you don't start with diplomats. Vexali tilted his head. You start with engineers, Marcus said, and logistics, and people who know how to fix things when they break. If somebody's coming to test us, the worst move we can make is pretending this is a speech problem. He tapped the screen where the 14 ships glowed red. You don't send diplomats, Marcus said. You send allies. Vexali felt something settle into place. Yes, he said. All right then, Marcus replied. Let's get to work. The first thing Marcus did was not panic. Vexali had half expected it, a raised voice, a demand for proof, a defensive reaction to the revelation that his species had been observed for 3 decades without consent. Instead, Marcus finished his meal. He ate the last bite. He drained the coffee. He stacked the empty containers neatly on his tray. Okay, he said again, quieter this time. Here's what we don't do. Vexali waited. We don't tell the whole planet yet. You are not going to inform your government? Vexali asked. Oh, we'll inform them, Marcus said. But we don't hit the global broadcast button and watch markets crash while 14 ships are still deciding what mood they're in. He stood, tray in hand. You ever see what humans do when you give them a vague threat and no plan? No. Marcus gave him a thin smile. Neither have I, and I'd like to keep it that way. By 1400 hours, Vexali had met 3 engineers, a logistics coordinator, and a woman named Dr. Amina Khatri, who did not introduce herself with a title and whose first question was, What aren't you telling us? She was orbital infrastructure, Marcus explained on the walk from the canteen. If anything was going to matter in 19 days, it would be orbit. We need parameters, Dr. Khatri said, hands already moving across a projected schematic of Helix Station. Ship class, propulsion signature, known weapons architecture, energy tolerances. If they're scouts, they're testing. Testing what? Response time, Marcus said. Exactly. Vexali provided what he could. Kretha vessels favored adaptive shielding, modular weapon arrays, long-range disruption pulses designed to disable rather than annihilate, at least initially. They prefer leverage to debris, he finished. Dr. Khatri nodded once. Good, she said. Vexali blinked. Good. If they preferred debris, we'd already be too late. Word travelled, but not loudly. Marcus seemed to possess an informal network that functioned with startling efficiency. Within hours, small clusters of humans were gathering in maintenance corridors, in engineering bays, in quiet corners of administrative offices. There were no dramatic speeches, no declarations. There were questions. How fast are they moving? What do they want? What's our industrial ramp-up window? Who do we trust off-world? Vexali answered carefully, aware that every response was shaping something far larger than the room he stood in. At 1820 hours, Marcus pulled him aside. You said they don't violate treaty lines until 19 days from now. Correct. So until then, they're technically not aggressors. Correct. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we use that. How? We invite them. Vexali felt a surge of cold that had nothing to do with Bay 7. Invite them. Yeah, controlled environment, public channel. We don't let them choose the narrative. We make first contact loud enough that everybody hears it. They may interpret that as challenge. Marcus shrugged. They're already moving. By 2100 hours, a draft transmission was circulating among a very small, very deliberate group of humans and one increasingly aware Seren diplomat. It was not grand. It did not posture. It read, in part, open quote, To the vessels approaching our system, we see you. If your intent is communication, we invite it. If your intent is assessment, understand that we are conducting one as well. We prefer cooperation to conflict. Choose accordingly." Close quote. Vexali read it twice. "This is direct," he said. Marcus glanced at him. "Yeah, we tend to be. It lacks deference. It lacks weakness." Vexali considered that. The Seren Collective would have layered the message in nuance, in diplomatic cushioning, in careful ambiguity designed to preserve every possible exit. This message left very little ambiguity at all. "You're betting on deterrence through clarity," Vexali said. Marcus tilted his head. "Is that not a thing where you're from?" "It is," Vexali admitted. "We simply prefer to do it quietly." Marcus gave a short laugh. "We're not quiet." At 23:38 hours, the transmission went out. Not from Earth, from Helix Station. Vexali watched it leave, a tight beam signal amplifying rebroadcast across multiple civilian relays. Impossible to miss, impossible to misinterpret as accident. 14 ships continued their slow advance. For 12 minutes, nothing changed. Then one of the red indicators flickered. A reply ping. Marcus was standing beside him in the observation room, arms folded, expression steady. "You ever done this before?" Marcus asked quietly. "First contact," Vexali said. "Yeah, not like this," Marcus nodded once. "Good." The reply signal strengthened, resolving into structured data. The Kretha had answered. The Kretha response did not begin with greeting. It began with measurement. A burst of encoded telemetry swept across Helix Station's outer grid. Not an attack, not quite a scan. A probing handshake that pressed against shields, mapped energy returns, calculated response latency down to the microsecond. Vexali felt it in the station's systems before he saw it in the data. "They're testing reaction time," Dr. Khatri said calmly from the operations console. Marcus didn't move. "Give them something honest," he said. Helix Station's shields adjusted. Not flaring, not escalating. Matching the pressure. Returning signal for signal. Not aggression, not submission. A pause. Then the Kretha message resolved into language. Open quote, uncatalogued species. "Your response indicates preparation. Clarify status." Close quote. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Status," he murmured. "That's doing a lot of work." Vexali glanced at him. "They are asking whether you stand alone. Then let's not make them guess." He stepped forward, not to a podium, there wasn't one, but beside Vexali at the central relay. "Transmit," Marcus said. The channel opened. Marcus did not clear his throat. He did not adopt a ceremonial tone. "This is Helix Station," he said. "You're approaching a system inhabited by 8 billion humans and a growing number of friends." Vexali felt something tighten in his chest at that word. Friends. "We see you," Marcus continued. "If you're here to trade, talk, or compare notes, we're open. If you're here to calculate leverage, understand that we're doing math too." There was no bravado in it, no raised voice, just the steady cadence of someone stating a fact. "We don't scare easy," Marcus said. "But we don't scare others without reason either. So let's decide which kind of first meeting this is going to be." He nodded once to Vexali. "Your move." The channel closed. Silence in the operations room. Silence across the relay network. 14 red markers held their formation at the edge of the display. Then one shifted. A fractional course correction. Minor. Deliberate. Not towards Sol. Parallel. "They're adjusting vector," Dr. Khatri said quietly, "maintaining distance." Another ship followed. Then another. Within 3 minutes, the entire formation had altered trajectory, not retreating in panic, not fleeing, but repositioning away from a direct intercept course. A message followed. Open quote. Acknowledged. Assessment revised. Future contact possible. Close quote. The red indicators dimmed to amber as distance calculations updated. In the observation room, no one cheered. Marcus let out a slow breath. "That," he said, "is what I call a conversation." Vexali watched the 14 ships arc gradually away from the path that would have taken them to Earth in 19 days. "You changed their calculus," he said. Marcus shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "We made it more complicated." 3 days later, a formal request for diplomatic exchange arrived from the Kretha. It was cautious, measured, respectful. The Seren High Council convened again, this time not in alarm, but in something approaching disbelief. "You are certain," Councillor Rethia asked Vexali, "that this shift was precipitated by your intervention?" Vexali considered the question carefully. "No," he said. The chamber lights shifted in confusion. It was precipitated, Vexali clarified, by alliance. He thought of Marcus in Bay 7, of coffee at 78 degrees, of a bandaged hand flexing once before returning to work. He thought of a species that categorized terrifying as impressive because morale mattered. We have been drawing circles around Deathworlds for 600 years, he continued. We believed the lesson was avoidance. He let the display shift to show soul, no longer outlined in warning red, but in neutral light. The lesson, Vexali said, was discernment. Weeks later, when the first official Serin delegation prepared to travel to Earth under formal alliance status, Councillor Drissen asked Vexali a final question. If the Kretha return in greater numbers, she said, do you believe humanity will be ready? Vexali allowed himself a small private flicker of amusement. I watched one of them injure his hand and return to lifting cargo in 47 seconds, he said. They build under pressure. They adapt as reflex. He looked out at the stars, at the space where 14 ships had once been and then had not. Yes, he said, I believe they will be ready. The galaxy still catalogued Deathworlds. It still marked them on maps. But now, beside one small yellow star in an unremarkable spiral arm, the notation had changed. Not avoid, not hazard. Instead, ally.